Hey there, Goa fans. Mark DJ Solitaire here with episode 18 of Retro Goa Explorations, my series looking into what I think are the greatest tracks produced in the 90s in the Goa Trance psychedelic dance movement in its heyday, and exploring some of the, I think, great artists, great productions, and some of the concepts that make, I think, these parties and this music so transformational. So today, first time covering one of the major projects of the time, and great musicians, and at least one of them still actively working in the scene. Today, we are looking at Transwave, a brilliant French duo of Frederic Holisevsky, who's also known as Dado, and had the solo project Deidre, still does, and worked on a number of collaborations. And Transwave was his duo together with Christophe Drouillet. And if my memory serves me correctly, they all went to school together, along with a fellow named Gregory Bailey, who had the project Opal, and he and Dado were classmates, and Christoph was a year or two older. And my recollection is that Greg connected Dado and Christoph, and they became Transwave, and Greg made his brilliant solo music that's only more recently come to light. But back to Transwave. We are going to listen to a phenomenal track that I wanted to choose, that I remembered something from my first season in the scene, from their EP on the Step 2 House label. You know, there's this one, and there's the Prana one on Step 2 House, the Tayo, using that name because they had Prana on other labels. And both of them are called EPs, but they're basically full albums. I mean, this has 8 tracks on it. And I opted for the track Robosticks. And then when I reached out to Dado, it turns out that this is actually a really significant track for him, and for, you know, that speaks to a key time in the evolution of his music making and the Transwave sound. And he very graciously shared some fantastic insights about what happened and how this happened. So he said that, you know, this came from the first batch of tracks that they were making for the Step 2 House album. And the label, they had sent some demos to the label, that was recorded straight to DAT from their sampler outputs, but they didn't have a full studio, and the label offered them a full studio, which was brilliant because they had only had limited equipment. So they very graciously accepted. And Dado said that this particular track, there was this click that took place when he finally got some really important insight. And that was because he had always really admired Total Eclipse. And who doesn't, right? Fantastic project. And Total Eclipse was going to be playing at the Rex Club in Paris. And Dado knew the organizer. And so he went to see the setup. And he saw that the lead sound of the SH-101 was driven in the preamp of the Mackie mixer, rather. And he had previously just thought, well, of course, you know, green is good, red is bad. But he figured out with how they were working that there was a distortion at the preamp stage that was taking place that would generate harmonics, and if reverb was added, poof, there was this kind of classic Total Eclipse sound. And he just realized, you know, there was this whole other level of distortion and capacity that could be created. So he didn't even go to the gig. He just sort of rushed home to his home studio, really excited, and started playing around. And that was the sound that he created. The arpeggiated sound in this Robostyx track is what came out of this insight of observing, of course, the great Stefan at work. And it became the Transwave lead. And he said that, you know, it's a little bit of both guilt and joy because he thought, isn't it kind of a ripoff of Total Eclipse? I don't know. I find when you listen to Transwave, it sounds like Transwave. When you listen to Total Eclipse, it sounds like Total Eclipse. And this is that very key distinction between imitation and copying, right? And inspiration and copying. You know, there was a great pianist who once said to listen to other artists, not to imitate, but to seek what they sought. Right? You get some ideas, and I think that's what happened here. So there's no way that we really find that Transwave really sounds like Total Eclipse per se, but there we go. And even in this track, Dado said that he was trying to sound like Technosomy in their great track Electron Bender, with a similar bass line and upper sound, but he didn't manage to copy it fully. And even if we listen now with this awareness, we'll be able to recognize, oh yeah, that does sound a little bit like Total Eclipse, but it also sounds like Transwave. It sounds like what it is that we came to recognize as their sound. He also noted, by the way, that it was really with this particular equipment setup that he was able to get these sounds, and it's almost impossible to replicate with the plugins. So with later equipment, it didn't quite work. And again, I think this is something that's magical that happens when you're using this old equipment, and that also was created by the curiosity. It was fueled by the curiosity and the passion of discovery. And that's a little bit what Dado's speaking to here. And I think perhaps is why this track is so powerful. Now, for me, this track, how this resonates is it really brings to mind the key energy parties. I've talked about that party where I heard Ollie, that one-off party in October 94, and the Odyssey parties that Jay and Mayuri were playing at, which were happening every 2 weeks. And Mick was running his parties, the key energy parties. Actually, really cool play on words if you want to look at key, meaning, you know, chi, the Chinese life force energy, and also key, as in the key to unlock the doors of consciousness or whatever. And Mick was a fabulous DJ, still plays in a different style. And he had this really expansive, mystical, you know, fairly fast at times, but really ethereal kind of sound that he used to play. Really fantastic tracks. And, you know, you could hear other people play the same tracks. This is something I've talked about before. You could hear others play the same tracks and they sounded different. And that was absolutely the case. If you heard Mick play, you knew it was Mick. And so Robosticks was one of the tracks that he used to play. And so when I got this EP finally, you know, I recognized it as, oh yeah, this is one of Mick's tracks. And this was my introduction to the music of Transwave, who, you know, a year later, this was produced in 95, came out, you know, this would have come out by mid 95, but the tracks probably starting in early 95. And then by the time this came out, they were already working on the tracks for the Matsuri album that would come out in 96. And there's one track from there that'll be, you know, once we start delving into the 95, 96 season, there's one that I remembered Tsuyoshi playing already in September 95 from there. And we're going to do a little diversion, by the way, just to talk again about, you know, the individuality and the power of, you know, unique artists' sounds, because this is a really sweet story that came, a lot of stories before the track today. A story that was told to me by Avi and Lior of Astral Projection when we met in Tokyo about 2015 or so. They said that Serge and Tsuyoshi were in Israel for a gig. This probably would have been around 95. And, you know, they gathered together, you know, before the party and playing, you know, what's the latest new music? So, you know, Astral put on some of theirs, they listened, Serge put on some new Total Eclipse stuff, and Tsuyoshi put on some new, you know, Transwave that nobody had heard. and everybody's jaw was dropped. And they were like, we can't compete. This is a whole other thing. This is a whole other level. And I mentioned having heard the story to Dado, and he's like, oh, actually, Serge told me that story as well. And then, of course, he was very touched because he ended up, he idolized Total Eclipse and then ended up working with Serge. They became friends, and they were both working in the GBU project some years later. So it just shows again that, the different artists can admire each other, can be inspired by each other, can even, quote unquote, imitate, be inspired of like, how can I get that sound? And yet when they do it well, it's their own sound. It's actually not so much an imitation. And let's face it, I've been talking about that minor third, and we're going to be hearing more of it today. And that shift between major and minor thirds. And they were all doing it, right? All of these great artists were doing that back then, and they weren't necessarily, saying, oh, let's do this minor third, or let's copy this other artist or whatever. They might have been heard it, got some inspiration, but their own ideas, their own ownership of it makes it sound like their own. Okay, I think that's enough preamble for us to be able to start listening to this great track by Transwave, Robostyx, which I will only add one more detail about. It's at the absolutely rockin' tempo of 150. So again, not all the tracks they were making at the time were that fast. The Transwave were making, or anybody else, as we've heard last week's, was 130. But again, how this sounds, how this kicks, how all of this music lands is really unique. So let's get started with this amazing track. There's that beautiful sort of undulating, mystical kind of synth sound that was very characteristic of what DJ Mick used to play. Notice how that lower sound is starting to come in, and then this, a kind of Morse code-like pattern that we're going to hear throughout the piece, has a really triumphant, uplifting feeling to it. And listen to the interplay between those two. Like a call and answer. And then, right, with all of that very strong rhythmic stuff, this beautiful legato, smooth synthesizer. It's pretty fast, but it doesn't feel as absolutely crazy fast as we might think. Again, notice all those elements happening, the rhythm, the melody, the harmony, those different sounds. It's very affirmational, right? That rhythm. And then we get this really triumphant line that comes in. That real celebration, like ecstatic kind of affirmational, the rhythm and the pitch to it. And then we get the same rhythm with these beautiful chords and harmonies. And here we get that arpeggio. That beautiful distortion at the top. Sort of tweaking, where you get to sort of like push some limits as well. And notice, one thing will drop out, something else will come back. Beautiful structure. Now we move into that legato. Beautiful evocative sounds, very nice long phrase melody. I just find we don't have really this kind of music these days that does this kind of long flow. This is really interesting. Just notice what starts to happen. Interesting voice. Seagull kind of voice. All of a sudden something else. I mean, everything just fades out, just holds your attention, and then this gnarly middle section comes in. What a creative way to do it. Notice some syncopation in the rhythm in the hi-hat. Driving kind of circular sound. It really takes on a shape when you listen to it that way, and then that echoing starts coming back in. It really adds some direction and dimension. Then, now we start getting a sound that we really started to identify as that Transwave sound. Just the way those chords move. Listen to the shift between major and minor. Beautiful. That rubbery kind of sound underneath now. You have both major thirds and minor thirds going on and all of that. And it shifts when it goes up and when it goes down. Again, that just sort of shifts you between those uplifting and more introspective emotions. Then it all falls away while this deepens. And this stuff just totally flow into the sky with this. Amazing, right? There's that combination of rhythm, the pitch, that slight edge, the tweaking that starts to happen with that. It really gets you, drive you wild on the dance floor. And that went from being toneless, to having the pitch, to actually having the tone from the scale in there. Beautiful pattern here. There's like a call and answer that happens even with that pattern. I just love the stuff that's got the harmonic pitch, and then that stuff that's only got the rhythm. And then we have that beautiful fluid phrasing again. There's a bass there. Right, and when this sort of thing happens at the end of the track, this is where the DJ is going to do some very skillful mixing. There's a long outro on this one. Wow. I mean, musically, structurally, everything that's in there, all the individual parts, and then how it's put together with that creative storyline, with that, everything just fades away, and then there's this middle section, and then all that stuff returns. And then to have that long fade out, absolutely masterful. And so whether You know, there was this inspiration, and whether that started out as copying, you know, it became absolutely original, distinctive signature Transwave. And that's again what was so special at the time, I think, where each group really did have their signature sound, and you could listen and you could say, hey, that's so and so. Can't really quite do that as much these days. Now I mentioned that Mick would play this at his sets, and there's actually a bit of film footage that I'd like to share. In the YouTube link, I'll share the full footage of this event, but I remember this quite specifically. It was September 95. It was the first Sunday, I believe, of September in 95. I had just come back literally that day, came back from my month off. Every August I would take off from Japan, and this was my first time going to Canada after having been exposed to this whole musical scene and everything that went with it. And arrived back and called up a friend, and he said, hey, there's a free party happening in Yoyogi Park this afternoon. Now, Yoyogi Park, there were all of these, there was this whole street that was blocked off on Sundays, and you would find rockabilly bands there and all these people dressed in 1950s gear dancing and this and that. And Mick and company, including the legendary DJ Kudo, had set up, and there was a free party happening there. Blazing sun, Sunday afternoon, loads of people dancing, loads of people watching. And of course, those watching had never seen anything quite like it. And Mick played this track, and it was captured on video. And here is just a little excerpt of the mayhem that ensued. So those were the kinds of vibes that I, in a sense, had my training in, my first exposure to the music, with that kind of absolutely amazing, uplifting, ecstatic kind of atmosphere. Just incredible. A couple of folks who you can see in there, you can see June Sogabe from the Organics designer trio who were doing the artwork for Matsuri. And you can also see my good friend Donaldo, who's the one who introduced me to the scene. He's sort of dancing around in there, visible at some point. I'm not in this clip, but you can find me in non-fluoro mode in a clip later on. You can check in the, you can see the whole video that somebody uploaded on YouTube, and just some wild stuff. So there we go. Absolutely monster track by Transwave. A brilliant production, really key in their evolution of what would become their part of their distinctive sound. Of course, all of these artists had different sounds and wrote music in different styles, right? Range of tempi, range of moods, from darker to light and twilight and all kinds of things. And I'm using twilight in the 90s sense in terms of what you might play then, not this new subgenre of psychedelic music that people call twilight, which I'll be honest, I don't really hear as being twilight in the way that I would associate it. But as another digression, just a really key track in the evolution of the Transwave sound that became so distinctive and made them one of the, those really important flavors of the Goa palette, in a sense. All of those unique colors that we had access to musically. So thanks to Dado for sharing those amazing recollections. And I will sign off here to leave you with the full track to enjoy without my blabbering over it. So Mark, DJ Solitaire here, signing off for another week. And I'll leave you now to enjoy Transwave's Robostyx.